It's interesting how color has the ability to create an unconscious emotional response from an audience. You see it and it's colder and it immediately kind of like tells you, okay, this is the vibe in the scene. The show follows the story of this UNRRA worker. It's a division of the UN that was created towards the end of the Second World War to help relocate and find the family members of refugees and displaced people after the war. So Nicky Gillibrand, who's a designer, has a very particular vision. Nicky really wanted to bring the sense of the war being over, but everything that had happened in the 5 years prior. The first meetings we had, she was like, it needs to feel lived in, it needs to feel like clothes that people have actually worn. And the other thing that was important in the design was that, of course, we have several different soldiers from different nationalities. So it was very important that they were distinct and separate from each other.
We're in the same kind of tonal range, but they're just ever so slightly different if you put them right next to each other. I think that's a really interesting detail to look out for, how they've both worn their uniforms differently and how the colour's worn out of them differently.
So Nicky came to us initially with drawings and designs in black and white, which is quite unusual. But alongside the drawings, she brought all of these boards of colors and swatches that she hadn't painted. And part of the initial design and supervision process was matching the colors to the black and white drawings and sort of like coloring in between lines of the characters. So we were working off of these photographs that Nicky found from a woman that was part of the UNRRA and just trying to discern what the color was in black and white. And what's interesting is kind of like, it's really just day-to-day life. You can see who the album belongs to because there's one woman that appears and reappears. She always has a cigarette in her hand and a very tight uniform.
I remember this photo was in a lot of our references that we worked from. Nicky particularly liked this one. And she's got like the same hair as Juliet and her side cap as well. Her jumper that she's wearing quite influenced how Juliet goes between the 90s and the UNRRA workers in the 1940s, and how she has that cardigan that kind of bridges both worlds. It was a very fun process to try and work out because both Juliet and Nicky both had a very strong image of Ruth in their minds, which was always really nice to know that both of them were like very confident that that was the cardigan that Ruth would have worn. I think it's also really interesting how some of these pages are missing swatches, and that's because we took them up to the textile studio upstairs and gave them to them and said, we'd like this jacket this colour. And it's nice to see how it starts so early in the process that it's so many colours and then they do get chosen. And they are the ones that dye them for us.
It was probably like a 3 or 4 month process in total of just getting the colors just right. So it was very demanding for them. I think that they will remember us forever.
In the textile studio, we are responsible for creating textile effects and adding narrative to costumes. And we do dyeing, so we're colour matching and working out palettes based on what the designer wants for their show. So I'm mixing 3 colours. I'm mixing an orange, an olive and a violet, which I'm hoping will make a really nice warm brown. These are samples of wool. Nicky Gillibrand was interested in sort of sampling this kind of colour for UNRRA brown. She liked this colour, but she wanted to sample around it. So often we'll kind of give the designer a range of colours. This is all wool, so it takes the dye really nicely. And so we've got sort of a range of like cooler, warmer, greener, redder tones for Nicky for thinking about UNRRA browns and all the different armies that were in Land of the Living and how she could represent them through colour. After lots of tests, I'm much nearer the colour now. So I'll dry it and make sure it's the right colour in natural daylight, and then I'll take it to the designer for their approval, and we'll carry on with the rest of the textiles for the production.
This is a result of the work done by the textile department. It looks a little bit like a sea of greens and khakis. But as soon as you start looking closer, you can see the difference in hue and temperature in the green. And of course, the accents of this orangey brown that Nicky chose for the UNRRA uniforms. So this is a little bit of an example of the variety within the colors. So for example, all these costumes are US soldiers. You can see that the hue and the tint is similar, but based on rank and also how long we imagine they were wearing the costumes for, the color changes a little bit. So the lieutenant will be a little bit more saturated, whereas some of the people that were actually on the ground and working were a little bit faded. But then if you compare that to the Russian Soviet costumes, you can see that the Soviets have a lot more yellow in it in terms of color, with the red accents, but the hue of the tunics, it's a yellow-green. And then their overcoats were always towards gray, which is quite similar to the only German uniform we have on stage. So those two are paired together. And then in contrast to this, we have the browns. So these are all different examples of UNRRA browns. It's different fabrics, so they dyed a little bit different. But what they have in common is the warmth of the brown that they're dipped into. So these are Juliet Stevenson's trousers. And this is Kate Dushin's jacket. They're all a little bit different, but what we wanted is the idea that they all belong to the same uniform.
So this was one of the first shows that I worked from the design process all the way through rehearsals and into technical rehearsals and then the previews as well. So I learned so much about the process.
For me, it was interesting in the design process. Nicky has an approach aside from color where she chooses one special item that she wants a character to wear, sort of like builds a costume around it. So in Juliet's case, it was the trousers, and it was like, we know we need these very special trousers, and we'll build like literally a whole world around it. It's interesting how color has the ability to create an unconscious emotional response, and I think it was beautifully done in the show.
Why didn't you keep me?